Hello, friends. This is the AlphaList podcast. I am your host, Toby. The goal of the AlphaList podcast is to empower CTOs with the info and insight they need to make the best decisions for their company. We do this by hosting top thought leaders and picking their brains for insights into technical leadership and tech trends. If you believe in the power of accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. Plus, if you're an experienced CTO, you will love the discussion happening in our Slack space where over 600 CTOs are sharing insights, or visit one of our events. Just go to alphalist.com to apply.
Welcome to the AlphaList podcast. I'm your host, Toby, and the topic for today is DevSecOps with Sabrina. And today with me, Sabrina Farmer, CTO of GitLab. GitLab is well known, I think, to our guests. You have like 7 billion of market cap in your the public market. I just checked. Congratulations, but yeah, thanks for being my guest.
Thank you, Toby. I'm excited to be here. Happy to talk about what GitLab's doing or anything in the DevSecOps space.
Yeah, maybe we first start with you. Like for the people that can't see you right now, you have a ton of Lego in the background. Is that your hobby or what?
Yes, maybe I have a Lego problem, or I love them. I build them every weekend. I love to create new things. I love to find new sets. And it's a real conversation starter. Everyone who has a meeting with me discovers something new in the background. So it's a good icebreaker.
Yeah, what do I see there? Like, what is the weirdest thing? I mean, there's the GitLab logo, obviously.
Yes.
There's like huge Lego heads, like, I don't know, like a football.
I have Pokemon, robots.
Star Wars.
Yeah.
Crazy. When did that happen and why?
I mean, I've always been a big fan of Lego and like figuring out how to build things on my own. But I think when COVID hit and, we were really locked in, I think my collection really boomed because I could get them shipped and I could do them every day. It was a problem.
So home office worked well for you.
Yes. Yeah.
And it still does because at GitLab you're fully remote, right?
We are fully remote, and they've always been remote. So it wasn't something that started during the pandemic. Sid started the company this way. And, when I joined, I think one of my favorite things someone said to me was, we work with the best talent anywhere in the world. And I really discovered that to be true, that they really embrace asynchronous work and getting the best out of their people, which means being flexible about the hours in which they work. And I'm amazed at how great it is working in this way. And I think, I worked remote before during the pandemic, but I didn't appreciate how different it could be when you fully embrace it. So kudos to Sid for discovering this early on.
I guess GitLab was then like one of the first and biggest companies to really adopt it large scale, right? How does, for you guys, like how does trust work in that, like in the personal relationship, but also on a work level? Like how do you make sure that accountability and trust really works?
I think that, it's more, we write our values out, but I think what's impressive is that people really live by the values and they hold each other accountable. So everything is documented in the handbook. And, if you do something that people feel like is not true to the handbook, they will call you out on it and say, look, if you want to do something different, update the handbook, communicate what you're doing. So it's not like you can't change here. It's just like, make sure people know what's going on and the why behind, doing something different so that they can embrace it and support you. And so, I mean, I think it's a commitment at all levels that people have here.
I still remember I had the former CTO Eric in the podcast as well, and he basically, I think he told me about your README idea that like everyone has a README, and you basically document like all your personal, let's say, special things. Does that still exist?
It's optional. It's optional.
It's optional. Okay, yeah. But I guess your README then says something about Lego, or.
I think that's pretty obvious the first time you have a coffee chat with me. I didn't publish my own README. I don't think that's unique to GitLab. I have worked with other people who felt like they needed to document their README because their style was not the norm. And, I think it's great when you do it. I try to be very flexible with I want to know what you need and try to flex to that so that I can get the best out of you. That doesn't mean I don't have my own quirks. I'm pretty sure I have my own quirks. I think it'd be hard to document it, though, Toby.
Okay, yeah, we'll find out throughout the episode what your own quirks are. Maybe briefly starting with your earlier career. I mean, you have a crazy history. I think you worked for NetSuite, you worked a lot for Google. You've even been like vice president SRE at Google, etc. Like that's like exciting. It seems to be like a lot in kind of infrastructure space and SRE.
Yeah.
When did you discover, let's say, that superpower for infrastructure, and why? Like when did you get into computing, and why?
I think a lot of people, especially more so my family than anybody else, is surprised that I got into technology. I think it's important to know, like, I didn't grow up with a computer. I wasn't born with it. But what I am is a problem solver. Like, I loved puzzles and word games, and you got to figure out how to unlock certain things. And then when I was in university, computer science was essentially for me the study of problem solving. So like most people, when I graduated, I started out as a software engineer. And I did love it. Like, I think for me, writing code felt like I was able to solve lots of different problems. And so I did enjoy writing code, but I got into the infrastructure space and operations space because I felt like I got to solve problems at every layer of the stack, and that complexity was a driver for me. It was really motivating. And, sometimes I could debug the back end or the database. Sometimes it was the front end. Sometimes it was the network. Sometimes it was the operating system. And so that diversity of problem solving was really what drew me into production. And I think if you work in the production environment, infrastructure is just something you have to learn how to navigate, starting from first principles, and you get really good at it. And so it's pretty normal to move into infrastructure later on, or any kind of specialty. I think when you work in production, you get to discover all the connective tissues of the different applications you work on. And that gives you a lot of opportunity to learn what you really love. Like, I think people that have worked in production, I've seen go and really deep into security because they became fascinated with that aspect, or went and started privacy programs because you get to see sort of where those patterns are that those leaks can happen. And so I think you bring that insight and can specialize it for companies. But yes, I've been at GitLab now for 6 months, and I was at Google for almost 19 years. I think it's interesting because GitLab's about the size of Google when I started. And so the idea of getting to be part of that growth again was exciting to me. And I think GitLab's mission of, helping companies be more efficient in how they deliver their software. I did a lot of that at Google, and for Google's products. I worked on all of Google's billion user products. But what's exciting about GitLab is being able to help companies all around the world scale how they're delivering software, make it more efficient, make it safer. And so I felt like GitLab was the perfect fit for me, and I have not been disappointed.
I think like the interesting aspect from my perspective about GitLab is also that you can basically help that many companies to kind of positively influence their infrastructure and the way they develop applications, right? That's what I find appealing. I mean, if you just come from like operating your own life environment, etc., and then all of a sudden you can influence everyone else's in a way, like indirectly through the code, through making people more productive, through putting people the right goggles on. I think that's what would fascinate me.
Yeah, it makes it really worthwhile. The everyday coming in, and what I like about GitLab's approach, right, is we're not like telling enterprises all around the world, like, do it this way, the one way, our way. We really try to partner with them and, what is it that your industry needs? What are the challenges that you have? We have the ability to co-create with them, because our software started out as open source and we allow contributors into our code base, right? We have a lot of gates to make sure that those contributions are useful and safe and all of those things. But we can build together this next generation of the platform.
And in our pre-discussion, you mentioned that you really like to push people across the limits, and I think you can do that like at first at GitLab, but through the software also like in every other company, right? How does that feel?
I mean, I've always liked helping people see past their own limits. I like to bring transformational change, and that's what I was looking for in my next role. And I think that GitLab is in a position to help people evolve the way that they work and do it in a way that makes them feel safe, because we do it as a partnership with them. But there's been so many changes in the industry. If you think about the last decade, a decade ago, computing in the cloud was only for a few companies. And now everybody is moving to the cloud or thinking about like, what's that strategy? And then today, you bring in AI, and everyone's looking for what is my AI strategy? I need to have an AI strategy. And I feel like that's one of the things we think about at GitLab is like, how can we help people develop their AI strategy, but do it safely and make them comfortable and help them understand the responsibilities that come with it and accept the responsibilities ourselves to help them adopt it in a really responsible way on behalf of their users, right?
What is then your AI strategy?
So, GitLab has Duo. And one of the things we're doing with Duo is, of course, we have chat and code suggestions, but we're trying to bring AI across the entire platform. So from planning, you can look at your issue database and have it summarize it or have it deduplicate like what's in your backlog. So we have all of these tools to help the planners and managers organize their work. And then for the software engineers, help them get started with the code, help them write tests for their code, secure their code, scan their code to make sure that it doesn't have any known vulnerabilities. If it does, highlight that, educate the software engineer so that they can fix it at the time of writing the code, as opposed to historically, I think most people who've worked in production, you discovered the vulnerabilities after it's out in the wild. And that's kind of the worst case.
FTP'd into the production server and edited your files.
Yeah. Exactly. And then, so looking at the entire platform, and then like, how do you bring AI to, your monitoring stack, and what insights do you get? And so we're trying to think about it holistically and bring the technology to our customers for the entire software development lifecycle.
And does it mean you also come up with monitoring systems, etc., or do you typically partner with them? Like, do you typically integrate with Datadog and New Relic and all the others, or like how does that look like?
So we have our own observability solutions, but customers can choose, to have, if they use Datadog, they can integrate it into the systems. We understand that that's what they need. But what we're trying to do with the DevSecOps platform at GitLab is help you reduce the number of different solutions that you have, because as you do that, you have to then integrate it back. You have to integrate all these tools together, and having been in places where you adopt lots of different solutions and then you're trying to tie it all together, what you end up doing is having to create really large teams who now own managing these integrations and keeping track of how all these different solutions evolve over time and do they comply with your policy. You got to keep up to date on that stuff. It's not just at the time of purchase. Software evolves over time. And so you have whole teams for this. And I think, Sid recognized early on that you can be much more efficient if you can integrate all of these tools into a single platform. You have a single team to manage that for you. And, you have GitLab helping you. And so, we have users who are on self-managed. We have users who take our SaaS where we'll manage it for you, your entire integration. And, but there's lots of different needs that we try to meet the customer where they're at.
Sounds a bit as if you're more like pro monolith than pro microservice there.
I think we are, I don't think we're pro anything. We recognize the need for both of them. I would say having managed both, I think while at Google, I had to break up lots of monoliths over time. And I can tell you that sometimes you can go too far. You can create too many microservices that, give you a different kind of complexity, hard to rationalize with complexity. So there's pros and cons to both sides.
Well, I have to admit, like at least in my mind, the trend kind of decelerated a bit, right? It's not for everyone, right? And especially a solution that needs to be like GitLab, that needs to be flexible and easy to maintain and install.
Yeah.
I don't know. It would be weird if you come with a swarm of Docker containers that all independently communicate with each other through some service mesh. I'm not sure.
Exactly.
And your whole stack still runs on Ruby, right?
Yeah, so it started out as Ruby. I think when you for an application developer, Ruby can abstract a lot of complexity away from you and help you build and iterate very, very quickly. And then over time, it can, as you scale, run into limits. And I think you have to manage through those limits, but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? There's a lot of advantages to it. But, we have a mix of different development here at GitLab.
I can imagine, yeah. It evolves, right? But back to the idea of DevSecOps, could you quickly explain it? Like, not everyone's familiar with the term, I think.
Yeah, so as you're building software, right, you have your software engineers and they're all building different parts. And so you need to integrate all of the code together. You need to build it and then you need to deploy it. And you also need to secure it. So in a lot of different environments, some people have different teams that do all those different things. And each of those teams can select their own tools or create in a lot of places, people create their own way of doing that. And over time, it gets more and more complex. So what we try to do is streamline it all end to end. And over time, we've filled the gaps, right? So it's not just about build the software, integrate the software, and deploy the software. We realize you want to get earlier on in that development lifecycle, right? So build in planning and design and integrate all of these tools together. And that's what GitLab does. So it takes it from early planning out to deployment.
Mm-hmm. Which means that you basically have issue tracking, you have a whole platform you don't have the systems to deploy them, like you don't have a cloud, right? But you basically have the right like tools to measure your application in production, as you stated. And is it still? I mean, GitLab comes from Git, and Git is the VCF. Is it still focused around the code mostly, or like does it all evolve from the code? I mean, I guess the best spot to find like early indications for security issues, for example, is still in many cases the code. And if you run infrastructure in code, then you can also spot it in the code, like, or many issues in the spot. Like, how's that these days?
I mean, I think that identifying the vulnerabilities, right? We try to do it earlier on. So as people are coding it along the way, but as we understand the patterns, right, for vulnerabilities, we can start to catch them earlier in the cycle. So when you're writing code, you can scan it. When you're writing code, you can scan it when it's fully integrated. So you can see those, the connective tissues, the vulnerabilities that happen in between those pieces. And then, and so not just after deployment do you identify those patterns, right? That's too late and it comes at the expense of your users. And so we're trying to pull it in earlier.
That means basically most common example, I guess, is credentials in code still these days, or?
I think, people have learned a lot of lessons of that, right? You want to be scanning.
Some people have learned, yeah.
And so identifying that for people and trying to get their secrets out of code and give them other options for that is definitely a pattern that, many people have learned the hard way, and we try to circumvent it for our customers. As they onboard, we can highlight these things for them and help them secure over time.
Yeah, that's actually a good thing to have. And what other patterns do you have, and what are the ones you're most excited about?
Patterns in security, or in how people are using
security and your whole DevSecOps cycle. Like, what are the best spots where you think like it's like people don't know about it and everyone should know?
I think what I'm most excited about is that I think a lot of what we're doing today, right, especially integrating the AI, is that we can upskill the developer and teach them as they're writing the code, right? Like, hey, you're writing vulnerable code, and this is why, right? And you capture that moment where they can learn, right, and not repeat it over time. I think if you think about when I started my career and you learn it in production and you write a postmortem and you try and put some controls in place to not have it happen again, especially because I worked on so many different product areas, you'd learn it in maybe one product, but that doesn't mean that your second product or third product was going to learn the same lesson. And I think that by built it into the platform, these moments of education, it's going to change the way people work. It's going to raise the bar and level of the talent that you have. And I think that's what I'm most excited about. So it's not like one particular vulnerability. It's like we've caught a moment to teach someone that, like, oh, that's the buffer overflow, or oh, that's you're sending a raw command in and that's going to, exploit it, or hey, you're actually going to risk your credentials, right? That there's some oversharing here. And it's those moments that I'm really excited about, because now everybody can become more secure savvy, which is important and hard to scale.
Really important, right?
Really hard to scale. And I think that lots of companies try to do it with education. And I think that when you can build it into the tools, which is what we're trying to do at GitLab, I think that's really where the power is.
So, I mean, education is still required for everyone who's not working in code, right? I mean, the human error is still, I think, the biggest weakness in the chain, right? And that, like, necessarily doesn't only affect coders, but like I think the biggest impact is still like the guy that walks into a company and says, "Yeah, I have to look at your server room. Like let me check your data center.
Yes.
I'm working here."
I haven't yet solved social engineering, Toby, but
Yeah.
give me some time.
Okay. What do you think security will look like in 5 years? I think social engineering will most likely stay there, but like when you look at the space where you can be active and where you can influence the world of security of tomorrow, like how do you think it will look like?
I think that people are becoming more privacy savvy, right? And I think how people are managing data is a really interesting opportunity. I think that for a long time, building data agnostic systems were very powerful, right? It really helped large tech companies do more, use the same technology in lots of different ways. But I think that privacy is something that you should feel deeply responsible for. And so I think as people are writing code and managing data, I think the future is protecting that data along the way and not just relying on infrastructure to secure your data. I think that it's going to be something that's built more into the code and how people are managing and thinking about data. And I think that has always been a rich space for people. And I think often how you manage data too often is an afterthought. Like, what is this data? How am I processing? Who am I sharing it with? And I think that governments have picked up on this and put more restrictions on how you can manage data. And I think that we've thought about that and being able to build a policy engine into, GitLab has been really important so that you can put like, what does compliance look like and how can you ensure that all of your software engineers are building compliant code? And we can put those policies and controls at the hands of the security administrators. And I think that's important, right? I think you have a responsibility in the markets that you work in to be respectful of their laws and people's privacy. And I think that that's something that all platforms and all service providers should feel a deep responsibility to. These regulations should not be seen as a burden. It should be seen as a responsibility. And the more we can help companies embrace that, the more excited I am about our platform.
Well, I still remember when GDPR hit, it was kind of a surprise where most developers I know actually thought, well, I don't know if this is like meaningful, but it in an interesting and positive way influenced the world, how we think about data, right?
For sure. Yeah. And I think also, with a lot of the AI technology that's coming out, you see a lot of opportunity to automate a bunch of this stuff. And I think, Sid saw this early on. We had a summit earlier this year, and he always does his CEO challenge. And, he threw out the challenge saying, what if Log4j hit again? And for people who don't remember what happened in Log4j, it was a lot like the GDPR fire drill, right? Where all of a sudden you had to figure out, where am I vulnerable? Where am I using this stuff? And there was a lot of people searching code and looking for things and then evaluating what was running in production. Even at the biggest tech companies, it wasn't an easy question to answer. And so at the summit, Sid said, if this happened again, can the platform, solve this problem for our customers? And that went, at first I saw how broad he went with the solution of like, find the vulnerabilities, fix the vulnerability, report on the vulnerability in the scope, and then roll it out. And I was like, oh my God, that took an army of people at the time that we had to look up Log4j. And I was like, that's really hard. We only have a few days to come up with the solution. And I have to say the engineering team came together with the security team. They knocked this out. So we had a demo in like 3 days that we could show that we could do this, that a vulnerability report could come in and you could come in the morning and have an entire inventory of where you were vulnerable, have the MRs to examine how to fix the problem. And then you could trigger a button and roll it out if you chose to do that. But I was amazed, and I was like, this technology has come so far, and it really showcased the power of a platform, right? And having all of this stuff integrated together. And that's really what's going to unlock a lot of efficiency, improvements, and confidence, right? That you are able to build safe software that is compliant. You can respond quickly to security alerts, and your users can trust that about you because you can certify it.
Did you roll out that prototype that you built there? Like, did you really ship it as a product, or is that part of your solution now?
We have talked about it, right, in part of Duo's workflow, and our teams showcase the different things that they can do. But I think it's an exciting evolution and very practical in how it can be useful to companies. And I love the ideas about how would you use workflow. That's been really exciting to hear the different ideas of how to streamline things that you used to have to hire for or hire contractors for. That's the real opportunity with, all of these automation tools that are coming out, leveraging AI.
Yeah, right. Like that's what LLMs are quite good in, right? Like just spotting where you really use Log4j and how and what your dependencies are, and like deep down to the to like single line. I mean the like if you run big projects, and the bigger context is still a problem, right? The context window is like just too large. But for those examples, I guess it should work quite well, right?
And, the AI models and the different companies investing in it, they're improving the context windows all the time. And so with a little bit of patience, like more and more, it enables you more and more. And one of the things we do is we get to be model agnostic. We get to pick the model that best suits the problem space. And that's been really powerful. And we get to partner with the different model providers to learn about what's coming and how to best leverage that responsibly for our users. I do think that as leaders are thinking about adopting AI, you have to think about all the consequences of your choices. And we recognize that early on. And that's why GitLab published the AI Transparency Center, so that you could see, like, this is what we're holding the models accountable to. This is what we certify. Make sure that your data doesn't go out of the system, that you understand how it's being used. Because, if you go out on your own, you have to do all of this diligence independently. And we try to help you uncover that, and build it into your contract so you can have confidence that we're making these choices responsibly.
Let's briefly talk about the buy-in on the developer side. Like how do you typically get that? Like is it like just many developers I know are kind of in a positive way lazy and like whenever they can automate something, where I count myself in. Do they automatically buy that AI is there to help them, or like do you think many people are afraid these days that this will make their lives harder in long term?
I think there's no one answer to that. I think it's all of the above. I think you have people who like change. They see change as opportunity. And so AI, they're on their own. They're like, what can this do for me? How can this make my life simpler? And then you have the other end of the spectrum where they're like, AI is going to get rid of me and it's going to eliminate my role, and fear can feed in there. I think that I think it will change the way that we work. I don't think it will eliminate, jobs in the same way that maybe sometimes is reported into the press. I think what I've learned in trying to get people to embrace it, adopt it, and learn from it is I've started at the top. So I took my senior leaders and I said, you need to go figure out how you use Duo every day, and then you share that story with the team, and then we'll ask the team to share how they are leveraging it and what lessons that they're learning. And so it became this a much more positive, like, hey, this was useful to me, let me share it with you. And so people started to learn from each other and share stories together, and that actually helped us also improve the product, right? Because someone was like, hey, this wasn't useful at all, and here's a video of me trying to use it. And that became motivation for the teams developing that, was like, oh, that's not the experience we wanted. Let's figure out how to make this better. And then you get kudos. And so then you're more encouraged, right? There's a positive feedback loop for embracing this technology. And I think that's really helped us internally at GitLab.
I think many people also just got the idea or understood after a while that basically you still need to be able, like whenever you generate a Python glue code with GPT, you still need to be able to understand it, right? You can't just run it, like you can't just trust it 100%. You need to be able to understand what it does. Same for, I don't know, if I run some AI tool that generates me, I don't know, Figma designs or a presentation, like the results are generic and they are helpful as a starter, but then like you still need to be able to use it the right way and manipulate it and be creative with it, like add that certain spirit to it, and then all of a sudden it turns into a superpower, right? Instead of something that makes you afraid.
Yeah, it really can be, to your point, it can be an accelerator for you, right? For me, I find that it frees up a lot of that startup cost, right?
Yeah.
It frees me up to do that, and I get more time to do deeper thinking and more strategic thinking. Like, I don't think AI is strategic, right? I don't think
not yet. Yeah.
Today it's not strategic. It's insightful, right? And that can accelerate what you decide to do. But it is just a tool. It is just a helper for you. And I think I'm excited to see where people take the next generation of products, right, into how we think and interact and perform and get our jobs done. I think that's more exciting. And I think you can be a part of it if you're embracing this and looking at it as if it's an accelerator. Like, how can this accelerate what I want? And I think if you approach it that way, one, you'll get a lot more out of it, and you'll be intentional about how you use it. I do think, you highlighted something as like people who think AI just solves the problem and you don't have a responsibility to make sure you understand what it did or check what it did. I've seen people say, oh, the AI is going to test my code, and, they throw their code over and the AI says all green, right? And then you learn the hard way if you push on green. So, you still have a lot of responsibility and accountability to even trusting the AI. And that requires some diligence on your part. And I think you have to indoctrinate that into your organization to feel accountable, to do due diligence with this technology, because it is still in its infancy. At least generative AI is still in its infancy, even though AI has been around a long time and people are using it for the first time. And we're going to discover a lot about what it's good for and what it's not good for. And I think people should set their expectations for that. You can adopt this AI tool and then be disappointed, but you should be like, what is the opportunity that's coming with this?
Thanks a lot. Really insightful. One thing I asked myself also for you as a remote company, how do you make sure that, people really follow your ideas? How do you make sure that people are like really onboarded to the max? Like, how do you make sure that people writing an email is a great thing, right? You can tell people, hey, learn about AI. You do it once, right? You fire an email and next day someone else starts. Like, how do you make sure that like everyone goes through the same journey and actually learns what you think is best practice? Like, is it all documented somewhere? Do you have your Notion where like everyone reads through and learns about like how to utilize AI best and what your vision is on it? Or like, how do you make sure that it works?
I think
that it
that
sticks?
there is a strong culture, a strong handbook culture here, to document, to be very transparent, in order to do exactly what you said, right? Like it's very easy to rely on tribal knowledge. I think a lot of companies do that, and it takes a long time to onboard people when that's the kind of culture and environment that you're fostering. Everybody's got to keep everything. And I think at GitLab, it's handbook first, right? If it's not documented in the handbook, you can pretty much expect people are not going to consistently follow it. And I think that they indoctrinated the teams very early on. So when you onboard, you get a reading list, right? You get a checklist of like all the things you need to look at. And I think as a manager, as things evolve in your team, you have a responsibility to go and make sure your handbook pages are up to date. And I think that we have a lot of tools that, as you do an issue or as you write code, it will automate making sure the documentation gets updated along the way. So it's not an afterthought, right? It's part of your process and your workflow. And these workflows are defined in a very intentional way. I will say it's a bit of a culture shock, coming from an environment where you're like, oh, we had it all figured out. And then you come somewhere where, no, they live by, if there's not an agenda, there's not a meeting, right? And that agenda is like 24 to 48 hours ahead of time so that your global team sees it. And we record meetings, and meetings can now be transcribed. So there's no excuse for, not knowing what's going on. And, luckily you can watch meetings in like 1.5, 2x time. So it doesn't take as long to do it asynchronously, as maybe participating in the meetings live, which I think I've really enjoyed it. Like I've learned so many things, and I've said this to my team many times, is like, I'm going to be a better leader than I ever was because of my experience at GitLab.
That's great to hear. And what is your top one tip these days for others who want to be a better leader? Like what is your secret sauce that you learned in the last 6 months? Is it watching meetings with 1.5 times speed?
Record all your meetings. I would say that's been amazing, by the way. I was really intimidated by it, Toby, if I was to be honest. But really embraced it. I have just been like, what a huge advantage. But I would say that my top tip for leaders is to lead with intention, right? To know, as you're going to ask people to do something, be very clear about why you're asking and what you want to see get out of it. And so I think leading with intention is a big one for me. I've worked in tech for a long time. I love tech, but for me, the choices that I make need to be in service of something. And I'm always very focused on the end user. Like what will this mean for our users? What does this mean for our customers? So that we make good technology choices for them first. So
cool. That's a good tip. If you could, like, just as of today, swap roles with any other tech leader for a day, who would it be?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. I would probably pick Satya Nadella. And I'll tell you because he's such a different leader for Microsoft, right? If you've watched Microsoft's evolution, I think he thinks about things differently. And I've seen him talk, and it's pretty easy to get inspired by him of how he thinks about competition and how he thinks about growth. And so I'm just curious to have such a large company that does so many different things, like what his day-to-day looks like.
Yeah. I also just recently asked myself, like, what does the guy do the whole day? Like, like, is he, I don't know, looking at numbers the whole day? Can't be. Like, is he in all the details of all the products? Like, how does he know? How much does he know about GitHub? Right? Like, how deep is he in detail? And it actually fascinates me if someone is really like still really deep in detail, right? Even though, like, I don't know, he has Office, he has Microsoft Access, he has whatever, right? And still, I assume he still knows the game, and on the other hand, can be motivating and can be like very journalistic.
Yeah, I mean, I think having spent so much time at Google, I have an expectation of, how deep the leaders are into their topic. Like, you need to be very technical to lead these large scale products. And so his portfolio is really big, and it's mature. And so, yeah, I'd be curious about how deep he's into each of the different products.
Then I still have a little surprise for you as an outro question. Sid actually told me about a little GitLab Easter egg you might know or might not know about. It's the good old version controller in like the good old Rails version controller that like you can look up the history of certain files with. It has an Easter egg that allows you to travel back in time physically. And you just have to basically add !time_machine, and then you add a name plus a year. And we now travel back at the very beginning of your career when you worked at NetSuite as an operations manager. You have the chance, like we observed yourself for a while. You were not, you didn't have so much Lego behind you back then. You were still like way younger and maybe acting differently back then. If you now have the chance to whisper something into young Sabrina's ears, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. I think it would be hard for me to say anything to the young Sabrina and have her believe me. I'm traditionally pretty cynical, and I think I just would not have believed my future self to tell me, that one, I'd ever be a CTO or would be a VP or would make decisions that affected billions of people. And yet that is my truth. So I think I don't think she would believe me anyway, right? But I would tell her, like, everything you can dream of, you're gonna exceed it, because that's been my experience so far. And I think that's why back to your point earlier where you said I like to test the limits. It's like I like to say what I think my limit is, and then I challenge it. And I think that's been the key for all the things that I've achieved, right? Is if I thought, oh, there's a limit here, I always just tested that limit and often would be really surprised at what was possible. And so I genuinely give that advice to people now, is like, try to figure out what your limits are and then test them.
push the boundaries.
Yeah. Just try.
Thanks a lot, Sabrina. It was great discussion with you. I will observe you for a while and see how much you push the boundaries at GitLab. Let's see all the luck with that, with your mission there. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, Toby, super fun.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the AlphaList podcast. If you like this episode, share it with friends. I'm sure they love it too. Make sure to subscribe so you can hear deep insights into technical leadership and technology trends as they become available. Also, please tell us if there is a topic you would like to hear more about or a technical leader whose brain you would like us to pick. AlphaList is all about helping CTOs getting access to the insights they need to make the best decisions for their company. Please send us suggestions to cto@alphalist.com. Send me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter. After all, the more knowledge we bring to CTOs, the more growth we see in tech. Or, as we say on AlphaList, accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth. See you in the next episode.